It began with footsteps, heavy, uniform. Metallic 52 Nazi soldiers marched through the narrow stone streets of Harlem, convinced they were hunting resistance fighters, but none of them knew. They were walking straight into a trap set by a 16-year-old girl. Minutes earlier, she had smiled at them, flirted, laughed, pretended to be harmless, and now they followed her like wolves chasing bait. Unaware that each step they took was sealing their fate, the German commander barked. Where did she go? She had simply turned a corner and vanished. But why were battle-hardened soldiers following a teenage girl? And how did she manage to lead them to their deaths, one group after another, without a single one realizing what was happening? Because what she did next was so bold, so impossible, that even the resistance leaders thought she was insane. And before the story ends, you'll know exactly how a teenager outsmarted an entire Nazi unit on their own streets. Fade to black. HAARLEM. Netherlands-19 for 3. A city suffocating under Nazi occupation, curfews, raids, disappearances, a place where even whispering the wrong word could get you killed, and in the middle of all this stood Hannie Schaft, a 16-year-old student, red-haired, ordinary in every way. Except for one thing, she refused to obey. While others avoided German patrols, Hannie memorized their patterns. While others lowered their heads, she observed their habits. And while most civilians hid behind closed doors, she walked right up to the enemy. Her friends warned her. You're too young, you'll get caught. No one will believe a girl could deceive trained soldiers. But Hannie knew something everyone else missed. The Nazis always underestimated young girls. They assumed innocence. They assumed weakness. And assumptions were the perfect weapon. Because in Harlem, the stakes were brutal. A single German patrol could wipe out an entire resistance cell. One informant could send dozens to execution. Every mistake meant death, and the worst part, the Nazis were tightening their grip. More soldiers, more checkpoints, more raids. If the resistance didn't disrupt them, more people would die. The city needed someone who could move unseen, someone unexpected, someone the Germans would never suspect, someone like Hannie. But no one knew yet what she was about to do, and no one imagined one teenage girl could turn the hunters into the prey. The moment everything changed was small, ordinary, and as Lee missed if you weren't looking, which is exactly how she wanted it. On a chilly October evening, she walked home with schoolbooks pressed to her chest, small and unremarkable under the glare of occupation lights. When the air snapped, boots pounding, shouted orders, the sudden rattle of steel against leather. Two patrols converged like tidewater cutting a channel, one blocking the street ahead, another hemming it in from behind. Civilians froze, windows slammed, and dogs went silent. But the officer at the front didn't bark a command to search the crowd. Instead, his eyes found hers and lingered, not with suspicion, but with the dangerous, careless curiosity of a man used to being obeyed. In an instant, she made the choice that would overturn her life. She met his gaze and smiled. The smallest, most disarming smile she could manage. That smile was a match struck in tinder. It sparked an interest that became obsession, and the officers, trained to see threat, instead saw a trivial distraction. They followed her. Not as hunters following a scent, but as men led by arrogance into the exact spot she'd chosen, a narrow, crooked alley the resistance had prepared that afternoon. She walked like someone with nothing to hide, then slipped through a side door at the precise moment the soldiers passed, and above them, rifles waited. The first volley was a whisper in the stone, quick, contained, decisive, and by the time the echoes died, those soldiers who had laughed at a girl's smile were gone. That single, ordinary night, a patrol, a smile, a corner turned, created a pattern. It taught her the exact cadence of the enemy's complacency and proved to the resistance that one underestimated. Civilian could make a sweep end in disaster. The event that began as a desperate improvisation became a repeatable tactic, and with each repetition, the stakes grew. More soldiers followed, more traps were sprung. and the Germans' certainty about their control began to crack. But the more successful she was, the more dangerous the game became. Because every victory demanded an ever more flawless disappearance on her part the moment the first trap succeeded. The world around her shifted in ways subtle yet seismic, as if reality itself acknowledged that a 16-year-old girl had begun rewriting the rules of survival under the crushing boot of occupation. Streets that had been predictable grids of monotony now throbbed with danger and opportunity at once. Each shadow a potential observer, each echo a potential signal. Each step she took a calculation in a deadly game that left the uninitiated dizzy and terrified. Hanny moved with a blend of grace and precision, learning not just the rhythm of patrols, but the nuances of each soldier's gait. The tilt of a helmet when someone noticed movement, the cadence of boots on cobblestones after long hours of boredom that dulled vigilance. She understood instinctively that fear and overconfidence are twin levers that can be pushed to manipulate human behavior. The soldiers who mocked a young girl moments before were now pieces in a game she choreographed with meticulous cunning. Every diversion she staged was multi-layered, a dropped book on wet cobblestones, a sudden shout from a vendor strategically positioned, a carefully timed flash of candlelight reflecting from a shop window to momentarily blind one sentry while another's gaze wandered. As she wove these small manipulations, the town itself became a character, a partner in her clandestine ballet. Alleys, rooftops, cellars, and even sewer drains were not merely scenery, but integral components of an invisible map only she could read. The resistance watched and learned, following her lead as she transformed the mundane into a deadly theater. The old men with rifles, the teenage messengers, the women with hidden knives all became part of a larger clockwork. She orchestrated with the precision of a maestro who had never been trained. Yet chaos is a double-edged sword, and the escalation of tension was immediate and relentless. One misstep, a guard pausing where he normally rushed, a dog barking at the wrong time, a civilian panicking could spell capture or death. She began to map probabilities in her mind. Which streets were likely to be watched? Which guards were likely to relax after long patrols? Which officers might give orders from habitual vantage points? Every successful evasion emboldened her, but it also increased the danger. As the Germans began altering patterns, deploying reinforcements, setting ambushes in response to the invisible pressure she exerted, the very streets she had memorized now became a labyrinth of potential disaster. Traps she had once laid became irrelevant when new eyes scanned every corner, making the next move a calculation fraught with near impossible decisions. She learned to trust intuition, pattern recognition, and the tiniest environmental cues, the creak of a shutter in a building she had passed dozens of times, the distant echo of boots on wet cobblestones, the sudden dip of a shadow in a lamplight, the timing of a carriage rolling across cobbles. All these details combined to form an almost supernatural, situational awareness that allowed her to anticipate the enemy's movements before they themselves understood them. But tension is not just tactical. It is psychological, and Hanny became a master of it. She learned how to play on the arrogance of the enemy, how to exploit their assumptions about youth, gender, and appearance, transforming her perceived vulnerability into a weapon. The soldiers who thought her a harmless girl now found themselves ensnared in a game of terror and precision, unaware that the trap they had stepped into had been laid weeks in advance. Every detail imagined and rehearsed in her mind while she moved through school, markets, and alleys with the innocence of a teenager living under occupation. Rumors began to ripple through the German ranks, sightings of a red-haired ghost, whispered legends of a girl who appeared where no civilian should be, who vanished before anyone could seize her. Fear, subtle and corrosive, began eroding the certainty of command, the confidence of rank, and the clarity of strategy. Amid this chaos, Hanny also had to contend with human unpredictability on her own side. Resistance fighters, while loyal, were fallible, distracted, and terrified. She had to communicate through coded signals, gestures, and prearranged cues to coordinate deadly ambushes without exposing herself. One misinterpreted signal could lead to friendly casualties. One hesitation could collapse the plan entirely. The city itself seemed to conspire with her enemies. Unpredictable weather, slick cobblestones, and late-night patrols layering chance over strategy. Every successful operation ratcheted up the stakes. Each time soldiers were eliminated or captured without warning, German reprisals grew, civilians were terrorized. Curfews became stricter, and suspicion spread through the town. Hanny understood that her victories were measured in fractions, seconds, inches, milliseconds, and that even a small misstep could cost lives. As the night operations continued, the tension reached a level that seemed almost unbearable. Hanny was no longer merely surviving. She was orchestrating a miniature war, balancing the lives of dozens of resistance members, the safety of innocent civilians, and the expectations of an enemy that could strike at any moment. The micro cliffhangers of each step, a creak, a shadow, a turning corner, kept her alert and alive. But they also kept the viewer engaged. Every action suggested potential catastrophe. Every breath could be the last, and every decision mattered as much as the strike of a sniper rifle. By the end of this sequence, the stakes had escalated beyond tactical maneuvers. They were now moral, psychological, and existential. With the faintest thread of chance dictating whether she would survive to fight another day. The streets were silent witnesses, the houses holding secrets, and the city itself seemed to bend around her presence, creating a tension so thick that it could be cut with a knife. Exactly. The kind of immersive suspense that holds an audience to the screen, waiting for the next choice, the next near miss, the next moment of brilliance that only a 16-year-old girl could pull off by this stage. The city had transformed into a living battlefield, a place where every shadow, every flicker of candlelight, every echo of footsteps could mean life or death. And Hanny had become a phantom presence, whose reputation had spread like wildfire among both the terrified German soldiers and the resistance fighters who relied on her ingenuity. What had begun as isolated acts of sabotage now escalated into a full orchestration of terror and strategy, a symphony of calculated chaos in which she manipulated enemy patrols, misled their intelligence, and exploited the slightest behavioral cues to deadly effect, while simultaneously ensuring that every civilian and resistance member moved precisely within the parameters of her carefully constructed plans. The tension ratcheted higher with each passing hour, because every operation was no longer about isolated success, but about creating a cascading effect, a chain reaction that would maximize impact while minimizing risk to her own people. And every failure, even minor, could ripple disastrously across the network she had painstakingly built. Hanny understood instinctively that escalation meant pushing her skills, her nerves, and her planning to the absolute limit, and she reveled in it even as the threat intensified. She moved like a shadow through alleys, using the curve of walls, the angles of rooftops, and the reflective surfaces of windows to misdirect the soldiers whose overconfidence was now their greatest vulnerability. Knowing that a single glance in the wrong direction could reveal her presence and undo weeks of meticulously arranged operations. The Germans, sensing that something unusual was undermining their control, increased patrols, brought in specialized counterintelligence officers, and tried to impose tighter curfews and checkpoints. Yet every adjustment they made played directly into Hanny's hands because she had already anticipated their reactions through observation and careful deduction, reading the patterns of human behavior with uncanny accuracy, exploiting fatigue, complacency, and the small errors that arise when soldiers believe themselves in control. Her actions escalated from small ambushes to multi-layered operations, a distraction at one end of the street, a false trail leading to a dead end, a concealed mechanism that created noise mimicking troop movements, all synchronized to unfold within seconds of each other, creating confusion that paralyzed enemy decision-making. Each move she made was a gamble, yet she calculated every possibility, leaving contingencies and escape routes in case the unexpected occurred. Because in a city under occupation, predictability is death and invisibility is life. She was by now not just a girl with chalk and cunning. She was an invisible general commanding a miniature army of shadows, bending the behavior of trained soldiers without them ever realizing the force that controlled their every misstep. Emotionally, the stakes became unbearable. Hanny was acutely aware of the lives riding on every decision. A delay, a miscalculation, or a misinterpreted signal could cost both the civilians she was protecting and the resistance fighters she had trained to follow her lead. Her mind worked faster than any human could track, balancing multiple layers of probability, timing, and human psychology, and yet she maintained a calm exterior, moving through the chaos with the poise of someone who had internalized danger into instinct. Every sense was heightened: the echo of boots on stone, the distant murmur of German voices, the rustle of wind through narrow alleys, the sudden shift of light at dusk, all became vital signals that informed her decisions, while the city itself, weathered and scarred, served as a living ally, amplifying the effect of her maneuvers. The climax of escalation occurred when she orchestrated what would later be described in whispers as a near-perfect ambush. 52. German soldiers were lured into a prearranged sequence of diversions, traps, and psychological manipulations that she had designed over days of careful observation. With every movement timed to the second, every hesitation exploited, and every fear amplified. Hanny's strategy was multi-tiered. False pathways funneled the soldiers into a confined area where makeshift barricades forced them to expose themselves, while unseen marks indicated to her where to place small explosive charges and other mechanisms designed to incapacitate without immediate detection of the orchestrator, creating maximum confusion and maximum effectiveness. She had anticipated every possibility. What if someone ran ahead? What if a sentry broke formation? What if an ally misinterpreted the signal? Each contingency had a plan, and every plan accounted for the human factor, because even the most precise operation can unravel due to unpredictability. And Hanny's brilliance lay in anticipating and controlling these variables in real time. As the trap unfolded, the tension reached a nearly unbearable pitch. The soldiers moved exactly as predicted, stepping into the zones she had calculated while misled by subtle cues she had planted days earlier: a knocked-over crate here, a shadow there, a whisper of sound in a different direction, each minor disturbance, orchestrating a grander illusion of chaos that led the enemy to believe they were operating freely, when in reality they were navigating a maze of Hanny's design. At the peak of this sequence, she had to make split-second choices: detonate a mechanism early or wait for maximum effect, signal an ally to redirect attention, adjust her position to maintain invisibility while monitoring the entire operation, all while the risk of discovery and the consequences of failure loomed like a storm cloud over every decision. Result was a catastrophic failure for the enemy and an unparalleled success for the resistance. 52 soldiers were neutralized without ever realizing they had been manipulated. The precision and cunning of Hanny's orchestration left no room for survivors to comprehend what had occurred, turning what could have been chaos into a perfectly executed operation. The city itself seemed to breathe with relief, the streets and alleyways silent witnesses to a strategy that had succeeded beyond measure. And yet, the psychological escalation did not stop. Whispers of a ghost girl spread among the enemy ranks. Fear began to warp their routines. Hesitation crept into command decisions, and the perception of invincibility shattered. For the resistance, the operation was a triumph, but it also marked a turning point where the line between life and death, success and disaster, became a razor-thin margin governed by Hanny's intuition, courage, and meticulous orchestration. Every viewer is left with the heart-pounding realization that the entire operation, which seemed impossible for a 16-year-old, succeeded because of her extraordinary combination of observation, strategy, psychological manipulation, and courage. And the climax is not just about physical results, but the mental, emotional, and narrative tension that keeps the audience on the edge of their seat, compelled to see the resolution, the aftermath, and the chilling conclusion that cements her legacy and leaves a lingering sense of awe, disbelief, and emotional connection. the dust settled across the city's streets, leaving an eerie calm in the air, a silence so heavy it seemed to weigh on everyone who remained, the Allies. The civilians, and even the enemy forces who had survived, bewildered and shaken to their core, unable to comprehend what had just unfolded. Hanny, the 16-year-old girl who had lured 52 Nazi soldiers to their deaths, stood quietly in a shadowed alley, her hands smeared with chalk, her heart pounding from adrenaline, yet her mind clear with the calm precision that had guided her through every step of this harrowing ordeal. The streets bore the signs of chaos: overturned crates, scuffed walls, and subtle marks of the deadly traps she had orchestrated. But remarkably, not a single civilian had been harmed, and her allies moved cautiously, following the silent signals she had left behind, each one a testament to her careful planning and unshakable attention to detail. The German soldiers who survived, scattered and disoriented, whispered rumors of a ghost girl, a phantom who commanded not weapons but fear itself, whose ability to manipulate their every movement made them question their own training, their instincts, and ultimately, their lives. The aftermath of her operation was not merely measured in numbers: 52 enemy soldiers neutralized. But in the psychological ripple that spread through both sides, the enemy now acted with hesitation, distrust, and paranoia, while the resistance gained an almost mythical sense of hope, courage, and renewed determination, knowing that one person, one girl, could change the tide of a battle that seemed hopeless. But Hanny's personal aftermath was not one of celebration, medals, or public recognition. Instead, it was shrouded in secrecy and tension, because the true scale and ingenuity of her actions were too extraordinary, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to be revealed in full. Her allies shielded her identity, moving her quietly from location to location, aware that exposure could lead to retaliation, capture, or death. Even within the resistance, there was a whispered reverence, a cautious acknowledgement that her intelligence, cunning, and bravery had surpassed anything any adult strategist could have conceived. And yet they understood that the story had to remain partially hidden. The world was not ready for a 16-year-old to outsmart professional soldiers with no equipment, no authority, and only a piece of chalk and a mind sharper than steel. Meanwhile, the Nazi commanders, attempting to regroup, were haunted by the memory of a girl they had underestimated, a name they did not know, a force they could not quantify. And the fear she instilled persisted long after the immediate operation ended, affecting patrols, command decisions, and their perception of safety in every harbor and street she had touched. The victory, therefore, was as much psychological as it was tactical. Hanny's triumph was invisible yet tangible, subtle yet overwhelmingly decisive, leaving the enemy demoralized and her allies empowered, all without a single public acknowledgement, emotionally. Hanny experienced a complex mixture of relief, fatigue, and quiet triumph. The immediate danger had passed, yet her mind raced through the sequence of events repeatedly, analyzing every decision, every mark of chalk, every hesitation or misstep from the soldiers she had observed and exploited. She understood fully that the real work of the aftermath was not measured in victories, but in controlling the narrative, protecting the identities of those who helped her, and maintaining the delicate balance between secrecy and strategy. Each choice she had made now revealed its consequences, the psychological terror inflicted on the enemy, the boosted morale of the resistance, and the survival of countless civilians. Yet she could not share any of this openly. Her genius, bravery, and cunning were confined to whispers and shadowed stories, legends carried in silence and awe, known only to those who had witnessed them firsthand. She became a symbol of both hope and fear, invisible yet omnipresent. A girl who wielded intellect, courage, and subtlety as weapons more powerful than guns, bombs, or artillery in the hours and days that followed. Hanny's operations continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. The German forces were slow to recover, constantly second-guessing their movements, suspecting threats where none existed, and overcomplicating their strategy to compensate for a presence they could not identify. The resistance, emboldened by her actions, launched further missions with a renewed sense of purpose, taking calculated risks now that they knew a single mind could alter the battlefield entirely. Yet for Hanny herself, the personal cost remained heavy: sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and the burden of responsibility for every life endangered or saved weighed on her young shoulders. An invisible crown of both triumph and tension that reminded her of the thin line between genius and disaster. She became a master of subtlety, understanding that sometimes the greatest victories are not celebrated, not recorded in official history, and not acknowledged by medals, but rather exist in the quiet impact of lives preserved, missions accomplished, and enemies outwitted in ways that no one could ever measure. The chilling truth of the aftermath was that Hanny's story would almost entirely disappear from public record. Official reports minimized or misattributed the events. History books glossed over the extraordinary tactics employed, and the girl herself returned to anonymity, blending back into everyday life as if nothing had happened. Yet the consequences of her actions persisted. Entire units avoided specific routes out of superstition or fear. Whispers of the harbor ghost circulated among German soldiers for months, and resistance groups used the same principles she had demonstrated to coordinate further operations, adapting her methods without fully knowing the mastermind behind them. Her legacy, therefore, was both tangible and intangible, a web of influence stretching far beyond her direct involvement, a testament to how intellect, observation, and courage could achieve what brute force and technology could not. Finally, as the sun set over the quiet harbor she once haunted with her chalk marks, the narrative came full circle. Hanny looked out across the water, reflecting on the duality of her triumph, the profound success of saving lives, the devastating effectiveness of her strategies, and the haunting absence of recognition or reward. She had altered history in subtle but monumental ways. Yet she remained a ghost in the annals of official records, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary contributions are invisible to the world, known only to those who live them, remembered only in whispered stories, and forever etched in the quiet victories of survival, strategy, and courage. And as the camera would pull away, the viewer is left with lingering awe. The shocking realization that one girl's intellect and bravery had changed the course of lives in war itself, an ending that is both triumphant and haunting, urging viewers to question how many such stories remain hidden, and how ordinary people can, through extraordinary courage and ingenuity, alter history without ever being recognized.